We like to think that police, lawyers, and judges can examine evidence and put away the world's worst criminals, though sometimes they're wrong and mistakenly imprison someone completely innocent. Today, we'll be looking at 10 innocent prisoners who were finally set free. But before we begin, make sure you hit that like button and ring the notification bell for more great videos. Malcolm Alexander was arrested back in 1980 after he allegedly attacked a woman. The victim wasn't entirely sure that Malcolm was the criminal behind the attack, though she identified him as her attacker regardless. Throughout his arrest and his trial, Malcolm insisted that he was an innocent man. He eventually hired a defense attorney to help plead his case in front of a judge. However, this attorney refused to do his job correctly. He didn't offer an opening statement in the case and refused to question witnesses whose stories did not align with the facts. Malcolm claims that his attorney would essentially stand by as the court system repeatedly accused him of a crime he did not commit. Malcolm was just 21 years old at the time of the event and had a son who was 2 years old. At the end of it all, Malcolm was convicted in the case after less than 24 hours of court hearings. Even in prison, he insisted that he never committed such an awful crime. Thankfully, the Innocence Project stepped in to help. Evidence was quickly discovered alongside DNA samples that proved Malcolm had not been the criminal present at the scene that day. He was eventually freed from prison after 38 years behind bars. When released, he was tearfully reunited with his son and eventually married his son's mother. He now works in carpentry, building furniture for his family's new home.
When are you going to pick up then?
Tomorrow. We're getting her tomorrow.
So where I'm going now?
Home. With your son? With your son.
Yes, indeed. Oh, I want a 3 Malcolm shot.
At just 19 years old, Kevin Bailey was arrested and questioned in a criminal case that saw someone lose their life. He was held in an interrogation room for more than 12 hours. Throughout his time, he was threatened by police and physically assaulted. He eventually confessed to the crime as a result of the incredible violence he endured, though he was completely innocent. His confession did not align with the facts of the case, but he was sentenced to prison regardless. He was finally released in 2004 after additional evidence was presented to the courts that helped clear his name. He had spent the last 15 years behind bars for a crime he was not involved in. After his release, he moved to Wisconsin to live with his brother. He now works full-time at a local factory. Back in 1991, Alfred Swinton was investigated after he was supposedly involved in an awful crime. The victim of the crime had bite marks that the courts used to prosecute Alfred. They examined Alfred's dental records and compared them to the bite marks on the victim, with a dental expert claiming that the two were an identical match. However, bite marks have never been considered a foolproof way of convicting someone in a criminal case. This idea has now been rejected by all medical professionals. It took many years for DNA evidence to prove Alfred was innocent. The dental expert also removed his confession from public records, claiming that he has since learned that tooth impressions are not an accurate way of determining a criminal's guilt. Alfred was finally released in 2016. He's currently in his 70s and lives with his sister who helps take care of him. Alfred was incredibly happy to be released, claiming that many of his health conditions were being neglected while behind bars. He's now receiving proper medical attention.
Freedom! Freedom! It feels so good.
Tell us what's going on in your mind right now.
In my life?
In your mind right now.
Right now, freedom, and thank God for the Innocence Project, every last one. And thank God, period. Freedom!
All right.
Freedom!
This man was forced to remain in prison for 20 years for a crime he did not commit. Keith was arrested for a supposed involvement in taking the life of another person. There was no evidence to back this up, aside from a police officer who lied under oath and a single hair that was found at the crime scene. Keith was found guilty and sentenced to prison, though he always insisted that he was an innocent man. It has since been noted that hair analysis is not an accurate way to convict someone of a crime. Over the years, at least 20% of cases involving hair analysis resulted in a wrongful prison sentence. DNA was eventually found and tested against Keith. It was very quickly determined that Keith was innocent and he was released in 2016. After his release, the officer who made false claims against Keith was investigated and found guilty for lying in Keith's case, as well as many others. We don't know for sure if this officer will face punishment for his crimes, but we certainly hope he does.
Free after over 2 decades of being wrongfully convicted.
It's overwhelming right now. It's hard to say right now. There's so much going on.
Is the emotion almost overwhelming?
Pretty much.
In 1993, Eric Kelly was arrested after police had reason to believe that he was involved in a robbery. He would be represented in court by a nonprofit attorney, though this proved to be a mistake, as he was convicted of a crime that he was not involved in. Eric suffered a brain injury in his younger years that had caused him to have difficulty thinking clearly. This allowed him to be easily persuaded while in police custody, which helped him to be convicted, though DNA testing was conducted many years later. A hat had been left at the crime scene by the criminal, but the DNA found on the hat did not match Eric. Interestingly, the police refused to admit any wrongdoing and would not agree to interview other suspects. Eric was thankfully released from prison, but police have no intentions of pursuing the real criminal behind this crime. Upon his release, Eric was seen by many news crews celebrating alongside his attorney. Eric now lives in his apartment and works at a Manhattan hotel, making a steady income.
Mainly, I want to eat. I'm a little hungry. Be with my legal team. I want to thank them. I want to thank my family. First and foremost, it's just a great feeling, you know. Just want to get back to like actually living for once. You know what I'm saying? I've been gone 24. It's been a long time.
This case is incredibly heartbreaking, but we're thankful the man convicted has finally been released. Gregory Counts was 19 years old when he was arrested for assaulting a woman. However, this assault never took place. Gregory was sentenced to prison for 26 years as a result, though there was never enough evidence to prove he was involved in the crime. The woman who accused him later admitted that she lied under oath and reported the crime after her boyfriend pressured her into it. Her boyfriend had had issues with Gregory in the past and wanted to have him locked away in retaliation. The girlfriend complied, sending Gregory to prison for over 2 decades. DNA testing was finally available that helped prove Gregory's innocence. He had already been released from prison on parole a year before this new investigation, but his parole was thankfully canceled after he was found not guilty for the crime.
Yes! Yay!
Freedom, I gotta put the freedom on.
Yes! Do the freedom walk.
Yeah, this is my dream.
Get together.
Nice. Oh, everybody 1, 2, 3?
Okay.
This case is very confusing for several reasons. Johnny Tallbear was convicted in 1992 for taking the life of another person. The only evidence against him was a single eyewitness who claimed to have seen Johnny at the scene of the crime. The witness claimed that Johnny and another man were shouting an Indian chant at the crime scene, with the man claiming to have recognized Johnny from over 100 yards away. However, Johnny was wheelchair-bound at the time, meaning it would have been entirely impossible for him to have committed the crime. Regardless, he was sent to prison for life. He remained behind bars for 26 years and was only released after DNA evidence proved he was not at the crime scene that day. Johnny now lives in an apartment while he works to remodel a home that he inherited from his family while in prison. Johnny's known for being one of the first Native people to ever be released for a crime due to DNA testing in the United States.
How you feeling?
Great. Many trials and tribulations the past 27 years as an innocent person. And work is not done yet. We still got things to do yet. But I'd like to set up an exclusive interview with all of you when we get the time. There's other things that need to be said and done.
John Nolly was yet another man who was sentenced to prison when police had no evidence against him. One of his friends tragically lost his life in 1996, with John being pinned for the crime. John was in no way involved. However, 3 anonymous informants insisted that John was to blame. The so-called evidence was looked at once again many years later, and it was found that all 3 men had lied under oath. New technology was also available this time around, allowing police to further analyze a handprint that had been found at the scene. The handprint was originally believed to have belonged to John, but further testing proved it did not. This was the only concrete piece of evidence that the courts had against him, meaning that he was released from prison once this evidence was removed from the case. He was released in 2016, and his case led Texas lawmakers to pass a new set of laws that would place more pressure on anonymous informants to give proper statements at trial. False statements like this are believed to be responsible for at least 15% of the wrongful convictions in the United States. After John was released, he married his childhood friend and had a son. Clemente Aguirre was released from death row after spending 14 years in prison for a crime he was uninvolved in. He became the 21st person in the United States to be released from death row due to a wrongful conviction. Back in 2006, Clemente found his neighbor and her mother had lost their lives due to foul play. He didn't report this crime to the police, fearing that him showing up at the crime scene would cause him to be deported back to Honduras. Because of this, he lied to investigators and claimed he had no idea that his neighbors had lost their lives. While this lie is punishable by law, Clemente never expected that he would be pinned for the crime. There was evidence that proved the victim's granddaughter had threatened her in the days leading up to her demise, but this information was disregarded and Clemente was punished for the crime. He was released 14 years later when his name was cleared once and for all.
14 years, 4 months, and 19 days I've been incarcerated. 10 3 months, 10 years 3 months of them in death row. But today is a brighter day, a new day, and I got good hopes for the future.
Ralph Lee's story is quite similar to Eric Kelly's story, which we shared a moment ago. Ralph was convicted of the same crime, with the courts insisting that Eric and Ralph worked together to commit a robbery in 1993. Ralph's story of the supposed crime varied significantly from Eric's, meaning that the two had not been involved in the crime together. In fact, neither of them were involved in the crime at all. When police looked at DNA evidence found at the crime scene many years later, they concluded that neither Ralph nor Eric were at the scene of the crime that day. Ralph was released alongside Eric with all charges being dropped. Ralph now continues to live life as a free man.
What would you want someone who didn't know anything about your case to know?
I'm an innocent man. I'm an innocent man.